The game industry job losses are continuing, with EA just announcing that over 350 roles are being cut across their organization. It's an all too familiar headline that just begs the question, is something going on with AAA publishers? So today, we're going to get a bit closer to the bottom of that question, plus a whole bunch more. So welcome back to another Industry Report, a near daily series where we dive into the stories that drive the industry discussion and attempt to make sense of them. Don't miss today's other report on the readiness of BioWare to deliver on the design of Anthem, and yesterday's news recap, which, is a little bit wild. So for today, 350 jobs at EA are gone. Of course, we recently saw massive job losses at Guild Wars developer ArenaNet and over 800 losses at Activision Blizzard, both notable instances of mass layoffs but with wholly different characterizations. ArenaNet founder Mike O'Brien was reportedly in tears while making the announcement, and a staffer said that he, quote, kept wandering around just saying we'll make it through this repeatedly. From what I understand, he is held in very high regard by his staff, and the layoffs were overall handled quite well, with severance packages and career help being offered to those who were affected. The layoffs, of course, came from up top, from NCSoft, and seemingly were tied to a cancelled project at ArenaNet. Of course, something that would make sense given the large expansion of that studio's headcount over the last few years. As for Activision Blizzard, well, look, we don't need to do a 3-minute recap on that. We pretty much all know what happened there. And I think the notable thing that people really picked up on was the perceived lack of humanity in the company's corporate communications. And that's something that very much is different to the ArenaNet situation, and indeed, based on people's reactions so far, a little bit different to the EA situation. Although I've got to say, I think the EA and Activision Blizzard situations are almost exactly the same, just that EA used more emotionally comfortable language in their corporate communications. So 350 staff are gone from the organization's total of 9,000, about 4%. Who's been impacted? Well, is it developers? Is it CS? Is it testing? In this case, it's primarily analytics, publishing, and marketing, as well as them winding down their Japanese and Russian presence in light of efforts in those regions not working out as well as they had hoped. The marketing boss, Chris Bruzzo, had this to say: "We have a vision to be the world's greatest games company. If we're honest with ourselves, we're not there right now. We have a lot of work to do with our games, our player relationships, and our business." With that being followed up by an official statement to Kotaku that reads as follows: "This is a difficult day. The changes we're making today will impact about 350 roles in our 9,000 person company. These are important but very hard decisions, and we do not take them lightly. We are friends and colleagues at EA. We appreciate and value everyone's contributions, and we are doing everything we can to ensure we are looking after our people to help them through this period to find the next opportunity. This is our top priority." Now, on the whole, their corporate communications are pretty bang on, and the reception to them does seem to drive home how Activision Blizzard could have saved themselves a lot of bother if they had have simply worded themselves a little bit better. Of course, from my perspective, it's all the same. I really care less about the words and more about the actions and what actually happens. In this case, well, things seem to be just about as good as they can be for the staff affected. EA are said to be holding employment fairs for impacted staff who can't be relocated within the company, and they're providing proper severance packages. And amongst developers, actually, EA are quite well regarded as an employer. Of course, that's not something you'll see in their public relations because of their closing of a number of studios and things like that, so that's not a perspective that's going to trickle down to most of the game's news-watching audience on YouTube, but it just is worth noting how actual game developers in the industry kind of view EA often as a publisher compared to a lot of the rest within the industry. Now, these changes were apparently quite known to the people affected, with a hiring and travel freeze having been in place in multiple departments for months, and Kotaku's source saying that layoffs had been expected since October. Now, this all comes around the same time we're seeing more calls for unionization, and of course, a big wave of that has came again with this. But you see, the thing is, unionization can't prevent layoffs. I mean, guess what? Having a union does not get you a free pass from economics. A union can't keep jobs, and if a union is so powerful to the point where it can temporarily, then it is going to be to the detriment of the economy's overall productivity and will lead to very, very severe collapsing job loss. What a union does do, though, is provide collective bargaining to ensure severance and competitive benefits. So here's the thing. In almost every case this year, severance has at the very least been given in accordance with local laws. If anything, calls should probably be more directed towards working conditions related issues and getting us a little bit closer to solving the crunch problem, which is something that is causing a lot of brain drain from our industry over towards general tech, where that's less of an issue. So it's a bit odd with the unionization thing. It's very easy to jump on this and call for unionization, but we can't do that while at the same time ignoring that actually staff are getting severance packages and are being helped in terms of things like job fairs to get them reallocated, or, get them a new job somewhere else. Yeah, I know I'm not going to win many likes for pointing that out, but I think it's worth saying. Now, for EA, why would all of this happen? Well, first off, they posted a rather disastrous quarterly earnings. Now, this kicked in all before Apex really took off, so their earnings was pretty dismal, right? Battlefield 5 underperformed. Sales-wise, it was pretty rough, but what's even worse for them is that many of those sales were actually driven by pretty deep discounts considering the timing, and that meant that the revenue picture for that game will have looked even worse than the sales picture. They also experienced a contraction in net bookings and in mobile. Now, it is true that they did see revenues increase year over year, but well below expectations based on their portfolio, with key titles underperforming, with their CEO saying that it was a difficult quarter and that they did not live up to expectations. That quarter, it was just a high competition bloodbath that saw traditional publishers suffer at a time where Fortnite was at its peak and where many very popular titles were competing in a very clustered time frame for a small amount of consumer money. Of course, EA were able to recover much of their losses in terms of stock with Apex Legends, a game that hit 50 million players in record time and brought $93 million in revenue in its first month, which is a truly colossal success that will no doubt have a positive impact on their earnings going forward. So, with that in mind, why get rid of the 350? Well, it actually seems like a real reorganization, that those roles were not needed. And being real, a company actually doesn't have an obligation to keep people employed simply so that they have a job, even if the company is in profit. The only obligation they have is to be legally compliant, to provide severance in accordance with labor laws, and ideally, of course, to treat people with humanity in hard times. And in this case, we largely seem to have seen that. Now, in this case, we saw a particularly large decrease in analytics, publishing, and marketing. We actually saw something rather similar with Activision Blizzard. So a part of me wonders if this is because of the shifting fundamentals of the game industry at the present moment. You see, these large organizations will have been set up for the industry of the last decade, with marketing, publishing, and analytics departments built around the traditional retail model. Now, that's a model that involves a dizzying number of regional distributors and retail partners, as well as a massive number of press outlets and various forms of advertising. Thing is, that old model is far, far less relevant to the modern gaming audience. We're less likely to care about a large television ad buy or a full-page takeover of a gaming website. And I actually know, some Activision Blizzard sources of staff there being thrilled at a particular, I think it was a PC Gamer ad buy and a Polygon article that they got for free, and comparing that to my own analytics and laughing. It was so bad, they just seem so out of touch, and really that's it. Many of these companies are stuck in the older model of doing things, their old hat. To put it very simply, compare the marketing costs of Apex Legends and Mass Effect Andromeda. Yeah, Apex was a community live stream and a bunch of money in the pockets of top streamers. Far less complex than managing a massive network of largely ineffective ad buys that will have had to have been sold manually on, ITV UK just before the news or something. Then we're in an era where you could put millions into a fancy press conference with suits, fancy cars, footballers, and a small legion of people working on buttering up games journalists. Or you could just do what Nintendo do. Create a quick, pre-done 30-minute video that you put out live that'll do far better at a far lower cost. Essentially, the point here is the industry is changing, customer preferences are changing. These jobs, primarily I suspect, are going because of you and me. The decisions we make as gamers. The things that drive us towards actually making a purchase decision on a game, the places where we purchase our games, by following developers on Twitter, by watching game live streams, and by buying games digitally, we somewhat make irrelevant what used to be a massive part of how the industry worked. And unfortunately for the people affected, their companies were not quick enough to adapt their roles to meet this new market. And I suppose you could level some blame for these job losses, if this is kind of the case, at the likes of EA not running successful modern marketing campaigns. I mean, come on, just look at their more recent ones. And maybe they could have developed those segments of their company instead of letting it get to this stage. But still, I have limited knowledge and I don't think there's much use doing too much more speculation. As for Russia and Japan, well, they're a different situation. I think Japan is notably hard for Western companies to break into. I mean, just look how well the Xbox has done there over the years. Sony and Nintendo will be damn hard to dethrone. As for Russia, well, it's a big free-to-play market, but I do wonder about the broader economic situation there. You see, the average Russian has less purchasing power today than they did in 2008, of course, with recent events and sanctions being rather disastrous for their economy, seemingly especially its consumer sector. So I do wonder if this is a case of just it not being worth the extra expense, or if it's a case of EA trying hard and failing. It's really hard to know, but we might find out more during their next investor call. Then there is the big elephant in the room here, Andrew Wilson's total compensation. Once again, we have seen people wonder why his $35 million doesn't go towards paying these people. Well, you know, ignoring how they're likely roles that EA just don't need as a part of their business anymore, only $1.5 million of his compensation is in cash. The rest is in shares in the company, and that has zero impact on cash flow. Zero because they don't issue dividends. Right? So they have hinted at issuing dividends in the past, but in 2018 they reconfirmed that they were not going to be issuing dividends, indeed saying they were going for stock repurchases. So yeah, Wilson does get a massive $35 million compensation, but only $1.5 million of it is in cash. The rest is in stocks, which does not affect company cash flow because they are not issuing dividends, which means that it has nothing to do with any amount of money that could possibly go to these staff. Now, I don't say this because I love CEO pay. I say it because it's actually true, and we're in a time where many care about their policy goals over the truth, and I think that's a very dangerous thing. And indeed, when I look at, say, the comment sections that are full of people whipped up into a false frenzy based on them, you know, rightfully placing trust in people who just willfully disregard facts in their reporting, it's unfortunate. And I mean, a quick look at the dislike ratios of videos on this channel does tell you that that is not the popular approach. It's obviously not the way to getting a high amount of views and likes, but ultimately I think it is the long-term correct path, the right thing to do. I don't know, misleading people it just seems, you know, a bit wrong. It kind of makes the world seem a bit more full of evil, conniving. I mean, yeah, I don't know, just misleading people on things, especially when it's to such an order of magnitude, like 35 million, when it's only actually 1.5 million that's relevant to this story. And I know they are all kind of big, arcane, crazy, silly numbers that are hard to relate to, but I mean, if we're not willing to provide the truth, then where is the educational value in the content that we create? You know, if there's none of that there, is it just rage bait? And if that's the case, why, you know, why, I guess. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the whole topic. Of course, thoughts going out to the people who've lost their jobs. I hope they all land on their feet, and hopefully other companies are ready to sort of snap up all of these new, skilled, experienced staff who are now on the jobs market. So, thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to check out the other report on the channel today, and of course the recap tomorrow. And with that, I will see you next time.